maybe we'll jump into it. All right, well, welcome and thank you so much for joining us this evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. This panel is called The Future of Business in a Post-COVID Landscape. And my name is Mark LaFleur, and I'm so excited to welcome you on behalf of Epic and my colleagues here on the panel for this conversation. I think it's going to be really thought-provoking. The future of business in a post-COVID landscape. Obviously, we've set ourselves a pretty ambitious and wide-ranging topic to talk about tonight. Early on in the pandemic, I think there were some really interesting and compelling conversations about how this, however you see it, how this crisis might have opened up new imaginings and new possibilities for how we organize ourselves and how we do business in ways that might spread the benefits of the business world more equitably, and maybe take into account different kinds of value across different locations and different stakeholders. And now, at least from my perspective, it doesn't seem as clear that those futures have the same momentum or hope embedded in them as they did just a few short months ago. And so that's, that's kind of my take, and I'm so excited to hear sort of the perspectives of the panelists on the business of the future and the future of business. And with that said, and with no promises that will resolve anything tonight, but with a promise that we will have, I think, a pretty amazing conversation, and we can't wait for that conversation to take place amongst all of us. So Epic's brought together an amazing group of really globally esteemed thinkers and practitioners who've been engaged in various ways with both contemplating the future and thinking about how we think about the future. So without further ado, let me introduce them. On the panel, we have Jennifer Lee Fuqua. Jennifer is the experienced design director at Ogilvy Hong Kong and a seasoned design and innovation consultant. She's previously worked at Frog Design, Fjord, and now she's at Ogilvy Consulting, leading their experience design capability in North Asia. She's trained in design research and is really passionate about the crossroads of business and design. She's based in Hong Kong, and she's spent the last 15 years in APAC, helping clients tackle business challenges that relate to growth. So welcome, Jennifer. Next on the panel, great, thank you. Next on the panel, we have Jacques Barcia. Jacques' an award-winning journalist, author, and futurist. He's a research fellow at the Institute for the Future, where he researches climate futures, designs artifacts from the future, and teaches futures thinking, scenario building, and design futures. Welcome, Jacques.
Hello, everyone.
We have Devin Powers with us. Devin's an associate professor in the Department of Advertising and Public Relations at Temple University in Philadelphia. Her research explores branding, promotion, and cultural circulation. She's the author of On Trend, The Business of Forecasting the Future, Writing the Record, The Village Voice, and the Birth of Rock Criticism, and co-editor of Blowing Up the Brand, Critical Perspectives on Promotional Culture. Welcome, Devin.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Jorge Camacho. Jorge is a strategic designer, foresight strategist, and lecturer based in Mexico City. He's a research affiliate at the Institute for the Future and a co-founder of Diagonal, a design future studio based in Mexico City. He's also a board member of the Plurality University Network. So that's our panel for tonight, a real dream team, I think. A quick note on how we're going to proceed. This is a panel rather than a set of formal presentations. So we'll be, proceeding, really quite informally. The structure of the panel is intended to be loose and dialogical. However, I'll be asking each of our panelists to make introductory comments, and then we can sort of tip into conversations and questions from there. Officially, we have time. We've blocked out the last 10, 15 minutes for comments from the audience, but really, please don't hesitate to post them in the chat. I'll be monitoring and will do my best to integrate them into our discussion as we go. And finally, I would be remiss if I said, please feel free to join us in the spatial chat. That's the post-session lounge after the formal panel, and there should be a link for that on the Pathable page. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of the panelists in turn to just give a few sort of opening thoughts about what's on their mind when they think about the future of business in a post-COVID landscape. And we'll be starting with Jennifer, who very graciously volunteered to go first. Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Mark. I volunteered to go first because I feel like I'm probably the realist in the panel among all the futurists and the bright minds that probably have thought about the future much more than I did. So I'm going to comment on this topic more from an observation of what's happening right now in the business world and how can businesses think about preparing for the future. In my line of work, it's less about showing the possibilities to the business, but more about building the confidence for the business so that they can be a little bit bolder and take the steps that led them to be more future ready, right? So I think I'm just going to start with a little bit of reflection. For sure, the pandemic situation has changed the structure of our lives, right? In very, very different ways, I'm sure. I'm sitting in Hong Kong, and my reality is probably very, very different from what everyone else is experiencing globally. How we work, how we exercise, how we communicate, how we shop has all been structurally changed and affected in some ways, right? As a design researcher, this is absolutely fascinating time to observe. And we know that some of the behaviors are probably temporary and will bounce back, while some is probably more structural and will be here to stay, and as well as a pace of change, right? So for the past probably 18 months, for businesses, they are trying really, really hard to react to this pace of change. I'm sure in Asia, I'm sure you see it in other places as well. And probably in Asia, this need for business to pivot is amplified because we have more authoritative governments that can actually change the quarantine and lockdown restrictions overnight, right? And they have done so. So individuals, families, businesses, they really need to be forced to shift their realities overnight to respond. Right. So as a result, what we're seeing in the market is that a lot of small players disrupting the market in a very, very fast pace. As a very good example in Hong Kong market, we had this small retail player called Hong Kong TV Mall, but they're not so small anymore. In the past 18 months, they basically tripled their size and become the #1, the biggest e-commerce platform now in Hong Kong, right? They basically just took over the market. And it's not necessarily because they have a superior product or experience, but really because they moved fast in responding to the changing environment. So the client that we work with, at some point or another, all have this like big realization moment where they woke up one day and go, oh, wow, look at what somebody has done. We could have done that, but we don't have the talent. We're not organized enough to respond to that, right? So this has been the reoccurring theme for the past 18 months, like how fast can we react? But now we're seeing a shift. The businesses are thinking about recovery and responding back to thinking about their growth agenda. So even in China, we're seeing China is a market really known for fast follower and micro innovation. That has been their growth model, right? But even there, they have been investing now in more long-term growth and really thinking about how to be future ready, right? And that is probably the million-dollar question. It's how and what exactly does future ready mean, and how can businesses be ready for that? So at Ogilvy, where I work, we have a research partnership with MIT Center for Information System Research. And they did a global piece of research looking at this exact topic, actually. And the research identified that there's actually two very simple dimensions that define a future-ready organization. And one is on operational excellence, and another is on customer experience, right? So just these two simple dimensions, if a company excel on both dimensions, they have an average of 16% more margin than the industry standard, and they are faster to respond to change and to innovate better, right? So for the first, operational excellence, that's pretty straightforward. That's traditionally what business have a sharp focus on. Let's do what we do, but do it better, right? Cut costs, increase margin. In normal situations, this works well for business. But because of the pandemic, the businesses have realized that this alone is not enough, right? The businesses that are lean and mean actually can be more vulnerable and in changing times, because there's just they leave no room to maneuver and pivot in this kind of climate, right? So, and then another aspect is on customer experience, right? Modern businesses all value it. They probably have set up a team, a function in the past decade or two, right? In fact, according to Forrester, more than half of the CX professionals say that because of COVID-19, their company increased the commitment investment into CX drastically. So, right, so people are paying attention to it. But the challenge is that people are paying attention to it in a very traditional sense, meaning that it's still tied to the marketing KPI. It's reacting and observing the shift in customer expectation, but they struggle to really evolve and adapt their legacy CX to be more on the organizational level, right? So a new mindset that has emerged is that CX shouldn't be a function, but an output, right? A future-ready business should be thinking about how they shape the organization and employees to align to those strategies and empower all the employees to meet the needs and wants of their customer. And it's just not just belong to a function in the business. So as an example, we have clients in hospitality industry, and they typically ask us to help with more traditional CX measures like acquiring new customer, convert sales, retention, loyalty. But now the same client is asking us to help look at how might we move away from SOP focus, standard operating procedure focus, to empowering staffs to provide the customer experience they imagine, right? So that is a great thing to hear, that the client are asking for these things. Another example, that a client that we have worked with, have a long-term relationship with, we have typically worked with their innovation factory to help them incubate new businesses, right? Now the same client, they are asking us to help to look at how can they rewire the whole organization on way of working to become more human-centric and innovative, right? So for years, we as a design innovation consultants, we have been advocating this idea of human centricity in businesses, right? But it is really the pandemic that has set the business on fire, and now more actively demanding this area of focus. So that's great to see. And I really think that it's a kind of a once in a generation opportunity for businesses to reset around people. And when we say people, it's not just mean the customers, right? But really around the employees. And even the bigger player now, the incumbents now, they have not only the permission, but a burning platform, thanks to the pandemic, to think about how can they transform the way they do business. So I guess to just wrap up my point, I think there's no better time for business to become more future ready, and really starting from being truly human centric, starting from paying attention to their employees.
Amazing. Thank you, Jennifer. So much to unpack there. Really excited to dig into it. Jorge, why don't we go to you? What are your first sort of thoughts, impressions when you think about business in a post-COVID landscape?